okay today? Good morning to you too. So, a story is told in Matthew's gospel. Jesus has been going through various villages and towns. He's preaching, he's healing. And he sees all these people around him, surrounding him every single day, coming to him, and he sees that they look like sheep without a shepherd. They're lost. They're helpless. They're vulnerable. He doesn't get mad at them. He doesn't get mad at these people for being lost and vulnerable. He doesn't yell at them. He doesn't make fun of them. He doesn't call them names. No, what it actually says in Matthew's gospel is it says that Jesus looks at them and he has compassion on them. Which, if you think about it, is really the only appropriate way to feel when anyone is lost. A deep stirring of compassion. And can I just, so this actually isn't a part of my message, and I don't typically do this, but I feel compelled this morning to do it. I know that there are students in this room right now. You've been here all week. And you still don't quite know what to think or do about Jesus. You've sang the songs. You may have even come up to the stage and jumped around. You've had a great time, but you're still not sure. You're not sure about this whole Jesus thing. And I worry that you're going to go home and the experience that you've had this week will just sort of evaporate. And you will have missed an opportunity. An opportunity to respond. Because here's what I want you to know. If that's you, if I just described you, here's what I want you to know. I want you to know two things. The first thing I want you to know is this. The story of Jesus that you've heard about, it's a true story. It's a true story. The story of Jesus is a true story. The story of Jesus going to the cross for your sins, being raised on the third day, offering you hope and salvation. That's not just a good story, that's a true story. But the second thing that I want you to know is that it's not just a true story, it's a real story. And what I mean is, it's a real story in your life and in mine. This Jesus in Matthew chapter 10, who looked at the crowds and had compassion on them because they were lost, like sheep without a shepherd, that same Jesus looks at you and I today with that same level of compassion. And he wants us to come home. He wants us to stop messing around with all the things of the world and finally find a true and lasting hope in him. So his disciples are there as Jesus is talking about these crowds. And Jesus has a word for his disciples too. The word for his disciples is this. He says, ask that the Lord of the harvest, let me back up. He says, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. That's the first thing he says. So he's looking at all these crowds and he says, there's a big harvest that needs to come in, but there's not enough workers. The harvest is plentiful, but the workers to bring it in are few. So he says, ask the Lord of the harvest, that's God, therefore to send out workers into his harvest field. You want to know where the whole language of like kingdom workers comes from? It really comes from a passage like this. And there are a number of different times in the Bible. Here's the thing. There's a number of different times in the Bible where we are told exactly what we should be praying for. And this is one of those times. This is one of those times in the Bible where we're told, pray for this. When you look at your high schools, when you look at your towns, when you look at your nation, when you look at this world, what do you see, disciple? Well, God sees a world full of people. People made in his own image, precious to him, people who he loves, people in desperate need of the same rescue that he has offered to us. He sees a world in need of his disciples to go and tell them about the rescue that is available. And so we continue to this very day to pray that same prayer. God, would you raise up workers for the harvest? Would you send out kingdom workers to announce your rescue? That's a persistent prayer even to this day. Now, one of the things that I love about this passage in Matthew is that in the very next section, Jesus looks at his disciples, who he's just asked to pray this prayer. He looks at his disciples and he says, okay, you're going. You're going. I'm sending you. Or in other words, you are going to be the answer to your own prayer. I'm sending you out. To follow Jesus is to be sent. To follow Jesus is to be sent. He loved the world so much that he gave his life for it. He calls each and every one of us to love the world in the same way. That we would be unwilling to rest just in our own rescue, but that we would commit ourselves to declaring that rescue to our world. So yes, pray for harvest workers. I would encourage you to make that a part of your prayer life. Pray for people to go out into the world and to share this message, but also be prepared to be the answer to your own prayer. This week we've learned that we are loved. We've learned that we're rescued. Yesterday we learned that we're changed to be united. Today we learn that kingdom workers are changed to be sent. We are sent. Now, I wanted to say that up front. I wanted to give you this whole thing from Matthew's gospel up front because our theme today is sent. But when you first hear our text for the morning, the text that was just read, your first thought is probably not going to be about how Jesus is sending you on this grand and exciting mission into the world. Sent would probably be one of the last things that you think of when you hear a passage about obeying your parents. And the text is kind of surprising. We're reaching the end of this letter to the Ephesians. It's 6 chapters. We're in the last chapter now. We're reaching the end of this letter. We're ready to go out and tackle the world. And Paul comes along and he says, obey your parents. He says, go home and obey your parents. Now this passage that you just heard read, it doesn't come out of nowhere. There's a context here. It comes at the end of a larger section in this letter. It begins all the way back in chapter 5, verse 21. Here's what that verse says. In chapter 5, verse 21, it says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And then Paul dedicates the entire section that follows that to explaining just what this submission looks like in the context of various relationships. It's lived out in our closest relationships. It's lived out in marriage. It's lived out in the relationships between parents and children. Even, and later on, we didn't read this passage, but later on, after the passage that was read this morning, he talks about the relationship even between masters and slaves, which, given what we know about slavery in the first century, would correspond roughly, not exactly, but it would correspond roughly to what we think about today in terms of like work relationships. The point is, within each one of these relationships, within each one of these close relationships in our lives, there is a call to mutual respect, mutual honor, and mutual submission, to sacrifice our will for the desires of others. And this might be one of Paul's most difficult teachings in this letter, especially for us, or maybe I should just speak for myself, especially for me, because I hate to lose. Do you hate to lose? I hate to lose. Matter of fact, it's a problem for me. I hate to lose. I used to golf a lot. Back in the BC times, before children times, I used to golf a lot. Like once or twice a week, I would golf. And I remember coming home when I was newly married, and I remember coming home from golf. I would always go with my buddies, and we would naturally be competitive with each other, too competitive with each other. And I remember coming home from golf one day and telling my new wife, I'm going to need to buy a new driver. And she said, well, that's kind of expensive. Why do you need a new driver? What happened to your old driver? And I said, somehow it ended up at the bottom of the pond. Not exactly sure what happened. It just kind of on its own started helicoptering over the pond and it sank to the bottom. To this day, I don't carry a driver in my golf bag as punishment for that act of immaturity about 25 years ago, okay? And what I have to admit, what I have to be honest about is that Chad Ragsdale hates to lose. I hate to lose. And I think many of us in this room, we're kind of in that same bucket. We don't like to lose. We don't like, and so when we read a passage that's all about like submission and about obeying and about honor, there's a little piece of us, isn't there? A little piece that maybe we don't like to acknowledge, but there's a little piece of us that feels like that's losing. What this really amounts to is the sin of pride, you understand? But we've become really good at justifying our pride. Tim Keller, author, theologian, he said that this is the primary identity narrative of our world today. That this is the way that we come to define ourselves, that you must be yourself at all costs. That's what he said. That the only heroic narrative that's left in our world today is the narrative that says submission, service, honoring others is for losers. You need to satisfy yourself first. We talked about this a little bit yesterday morning, if you remember. The morality of the world is a trickle-down morality. You take care of yourself first, and then maybe if you have time, you could take care of others. And this narrative is everywhere that we look. It's in the songs that we listen to, the movies that we watch. It's everywhere that we look. So when Paul says, submit to one another, when he says, honor your parents, when he says, respect your bosses, your teachers, your coaches, generally put others before yourself, there's this pushback, there's this sort of reflexive, yeah, but, that rises to our lips. But this is a really important point. There will always be those times, there will always be those people in your life where submission is just hard. Sometimes it's hard because of them. You know, it's not as if Paul, when he's writing the book of Ephesians, didn't know about the existence of jerks, okay? Sometimes submission is hard because, honestly, it's hard to submit to other people. But sometimes the problem is us. But none of that really matters. If our submission to others was all wrapped up in whether or not they deserved it, we would never find reasons to obey. We would never find reasons to submit. Our submission is not wrapped up in whether others deserve it. Hear me on this. Our submission to others is the byproduct of our submission to Jesus. Because I love Jesus, let me just put it very simply. Because I love Jesus, I will love and even submit to others. I'll place them ahead of myself. In Jesus, we've talked about this all week. In Jesus, we've won. In Jesus, we've been rescued. In Jesus, we've been changed. But make no mistake, our rescue was done for us. We didn't earn it. We don't deserve it. We were saved by Jesus' own submission to the cross for our sake. Jesus gave his life for a bunch of sinners and jerks like us so that we could have life, hope, and salvation. It may not sound glamorous, it may not sound exciting, but the only way to truly follow a Lord like that, listen, the only way to truly follow a Lord who goes to the cross on our behalf is to learn to honor others ahead of ourselves. What we need to learn and what we need to practice is the discipline of not always getting our way. Now, some of you are wondering, what does this have to do with the theme of sent? What does this mean to be sent? Well, let me go back to Matthew chapter 10. In Matthew chapter 10, do you know where Jesus first sends his disciples? He sends them among the lost sheep of Israel. In other words, he sent them to their own backyards. He sent them home. Jesus does call us to the ends of the earth, but kingdom work starts at home. Kingdom work starts in our high schools. It starts on our teams. It starts at the places where we work. Kingdom work starts when we place others ahead of ourselves in our closest relationships. That's kingdom work. Have you ever thought about something as basic as obeying your parents as kingdom work? You probably should. If kingdom work is about imitating God, and if God is about submitting himself so that we could be rescued, then maybe that's exactly what kingdom work looks like. Have you ever thought about being honest and respectful to your teachers, to your bosses, to your coaches? Have you ever thought about that as being kingdom work? Maybe you should. Have you ever thought about living your life so that you don't always have to get your way? Have you ever thought about that as kingdom work? Maybe you should. We all should pray that God would raise up kingdom workers, but be prepared to be the answer to your own prayer. In another place in the Gospels, in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus heals a demon-possessed man who lived among the tombs. This is a crazy story. This is the story, you might have heard of this story before. Jesus asks this demon its name, and the demon responds by saying, "I am legion, for I am many." Jesus heals this man. And I want to read this passage in Mark chapter 5, verse 18. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. So in other words, this man has just been healed by Jesus, and this man's like, "Let me come along with you. I want to go wherever you're going. I want to follow you just like your disciples. Let me go with you." Jesus did not let him. He didn't let him. Instead, he said this, "Go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how much he has had mercy on you." So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis, which is a group of cities, how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed. Jesus sends this man home. He sends him home. Jesus tells this man, "You will follow me by going home." And he's saying much the same to us. In Jesus, you're loved, you're rescued, you're changed. The same Jesus who healed this demon-possessed man is the same Jesus who has rescued you and who is changing you. The same Jesus is now sending you back home at the end of this day. He's sending you home. So here's the question. Here's the question I want you to wrestle with as you leave this morning. How will home be changed because of what Jesus has done in you this week? Can I say that again? How will your home be changed because of what Jesus has done this week? I used to go every year to move with our youth group at our church, and we would go up to Michigan, and we'd have this long bus ride home after the event. And about every year, as we're pulling into the church parking lot, the youth minister, good friend of mine, he would say much the same thing every year. He would tell the students this: you could undo a lot of the good things that have happened this week in your first 5 minutes with your parents after we drop you off. You can undo a lot of the good that has been done this week in the first 5 minutes you spend with your parents after we drop you off. And what he was trying to communicate to these students is this: everything that happened at Move doesn't stay at Move. Everything that happened this week, it doesn't stay at that week. It goes home with you. It goes home with you when you talk to your brother, when you talk to your sister. It goes home with you when you talk to your parents. It goes home with you when you show up at practice, when you go to school. It goes home with you. So the question is, how is home changed because of how you've been changed this week? Kingdom work starts with letting Jesus influence those everyday small decisions that we make in our relationships to reflect the reality of Jesus in our lives. Kingdom work starts at home. Let me pray for you.